The Supreme Court's doubling down on Citizens United wasn't the only decision this session that seemed designed to strengthen the grip of corporate America and the super rich. Another one, Knox versus SEIU Local 1000, that's the Service Employees International Union, would diminish the financial power of organized labor by restricting union dues used for political action. The Knox decision is just the latest attack in the ongoing battle against labor. And like the fight in Wisconsin and other states, it focuses on public sector unions, in part because they're the greatest remaining bastion of labor's power. The strength of organized labor was once a muscular way for working people to push back against plutocracy. In union there is strength. That was the old saying, and it was true. But the percentage of union members in the American workforce has declined in the last 60 years from 35% to 12%. And labor has faced a pounding series of setbacks, of which the Supreme Court's Knox decision is just the latest. And yet, with corporations continuing to put the squeeze on employees, with joblessness and inequality rampant, now would seem the perfect time for people to turn back to unions to fight for them against the moneyed interest. Why haven't they? Stephen Lerner has spent more than 3 decades as a labor and community organizer and as architect of the Justice for Janitors campaign. He was director of SEIU's private equity project, which worked to expose the Wall Street feeding frenzy that would end in catastrophe, especially for the working class. Bill Fletcher Jr. graduated from Harvard and went to work as a shipyard welder, along the way becoming a labor activist fighting for racial justice and union democracy. He has worked with SEIU and the United Auto Workers, among others. He's the author of this upcoming book, They're Bankrupting Us, and 20 Other Myths About Unions. Welcome to both of you.
Thank you.
Corporate profits are at an all-time high. Wages as a percent of the economy are at an all-time low, and fewer people are employed than any time in the past 30 years. Why isn't this the opportunity for an old-fashioned, good old fight for the working people?
The question is less, is it the right moment to organize, but what are the ways we organize, and what are the things that we have to start doing that really let us take on corporate power?
Such as?
Massive nonviolent civil disobedience. The labor movement was built when it occupied factories, which wasn't legal either. That we need to look at a set of tactics and be willing to take risks and things that we haven't done in years, because when somebody wants to destroy you, giant corporations, they've passed laws to make it illegal for you to exercise your democratic rights, then we need to look at movements of the past in other countries, and what they've done again and again is said, we're willing to go to jail, we're willing to take tremendous risks to win our country.
The difficulty in developing and moving in the direction that Stephen is suggesting is that the leaders themselves have to begin by recognizing that this is not 1970, that there's no going back to what we once had.
You're talking about the leaders of unions.
Leaders of
and
unions.
You're saying they don't recognize
They
it.
don't. They continue, they are fearful, Bill, of fundamentally becoming organizations that are viewed as disreputable. They're very worried about being in a situation where they're no longer invited to the White House dinners. And what we have to understand is that unions did not get started based on White House dinners. They got started based on exactly what Stephen is suggesting, that you have to be ready to throw the dice. And most of the leaders of the movement, unfortunately at this point, remain fearful of shaking the table. We need battle stations, new level of vitality, new level of tactics, new strategies, new forms of organization that we have not previously used. That's where we are.
I think many of us at least have spent our life sort of waiting for the great leader to come and save us. And I'm not waiting. I don't think that there's going to be somebody in Washington that's going to emerge and do that. I think instead we have to look at where are the battles that we can have that we can both win, but also become symbolic and exciting, that inspire and move people, because the labor movement's suffering from a version of the Stockholm Syndrome, that we've been held captive by capital for so long, we're so used to losing that we almost identify with our oppressor. And that part of what has to happen here is brilliant strategies and tactics. But there's another piece, which is that we just have to be willing to say, slowly dying is worse than having a really big fight and trying to win.
Let's use this Wisconsin example. Labor has spent very little time focusing on educating its own membership. 38% of the families of union members voted for Walker as opposed to voting for the recall. People look at their self-interest in very different ways, and it's up to the unions to really create a framework where there's a dialogue, not simply telling people what to believe, but really a dialogue about what's happening to working people in the United States. There are 16 million union members.
Private and public?
Private and public. Organized labor needs to look to educate those 16 million people. Because it's not simply about building alliances between the leaders of different unions and various community organizations or social movements. It's that the members of the unions have to feel themselves that they're part of something larger. People have to have that bigger picture. Unions can do that. They should be doing it now. But that necessitates putting resources that many leaders feel could best go elsewhere.
It's too easy to blame the bad guys. It's sort of corporations try to destroy unions because that's what they do. Mm-hmm. Is that the labor movement really for 30 years, 40 years, has, with some exceptions of great work, not been focused on organizing private sector workers, has not been focused. And I think workers are much more likely to organize if they think the consequence of organizing is life gets better, then you get your brains blown out, which is really, when I knock on a door and say, do you want to join the union, what most workers are thinking, oh, do I want to lose my job? And so I think we have this funny moment where we have to both inspire people to take a risk because there's a vision grand enough to fight for, but also people have to think there's some hope of winning, and that's not what we've offered.
But there was a lot of hope of winning in Wisconsin, and workers and their families did exactly what you are recommending. They got out in the streets, they had strikes, they had protests, they prolonged their demonstrations, and still you lost.
Well, but what I would raise as a question is whether the primary field where we're going to change the country is through elections. And that may not be the place. That's where, one of the things a good organizer does is try to figure out is where can we maximize our power and how do we play in the field where we're most successful. And it's important we win the presidency, important we do politics, but thinking we're going to vote our way out of this mess when we have a declining base, I think is a mistake.
President Obama stayed on the sidelines in Wisconsin, as he has in so many of these labor fights of the last 3 years. Do you feel betrayed by Obama?
Not at all. First of all, I think that it was correct for Obama not to go into Wisconsin because he would have become the issue. But the deeper question is, I don't feel betrayed by Obama. I feel disappointed in Obama. But I think that if anyone had looked at who he was in 2008, they would have understood this is a corporate liberal.
What do you mean by that?
He is someone who sees his relationship with Wall Street, with the major corporations. That's the critical alliance for Obama. He saw himself as preserving capitalism, and he saw himself not as a champion of working people. He saw himself, he gave wonderful speeches to working people, but he did not see himself as the person who was saying, we're going to take on the economic royalists.
I think in 2008, the labor movement failed because we thought one human being was going to fix everything, and we went into neutral. And I think the real moment of lost opportunity was when the economic crisis hit, that unions and other progressives were waiting for somebody to fix it versus being in the street and really challenging the power of Wall Street. There was a moment where the entire country was questioning.
Trade unions keep giving money to the Democrats because you think they'll come to your rescue, and they don't. I mean, why does labor keep depending on a party that is always hanging it out to dry?
I think the things that unions, and it's not just unions, but progressives need to think about is who really has the country in a mess. And I think we've been very nervous about really, with red hot anger, naming who the bad guys are and then talking about in terms that resonate with people, not abstractions about trillions of dollars, but talking about this teeny group of people at the top that are pillaging the country. And I think when we start to focus that and then have ways that people can act that's not just about rhetoric, and I'll give you a specific example. In California, there is a program to pass a series of laws that defend homeowners and protect them from their homes being foreclosed on illegally, protect if a bank forecloses on a home, they now get fined $1,000 a day every day if they don't maintain the home. There's a whole set of legislation that's been passed. Many of the people who should support it haven't supported it, right? And so the way we've gone about getting them to support it is not to say we would or wouldn't support them, but we actually took people that were facing foreclosure and took them to the lawn of some of those politics and did ads saying, here's Mary Smith, she faces foreclosure, this is her state representative, and he won't support the law that would save her home. It's those kinds of things that are pressure on politicians to do something that really matter, that are about workers saying, we want to start getting our money back from Wall Street.